Welcome to Attune to Your Alchemy, a podcast for women who want to step into their divine feminine, embody their sacred pleasure, and be in community with other women who are living their soul's purpose. I'm your host, Ellie McMillan, a priestess with the 13 Moon Mystery School and founder of the online community, the Matriarch Collective. I have the privilege of working with women who want to reconnect to their souls and remember what it's like to be in their sacredness. Together, we are going to explore the wilds of intimacy, pleasure, feminine energetics, and the alchemy of our everyday lives. This is a sacred place for you to reclaim your magic and embrace the power of the divine. Come with me. Sisters, it's time to reclaim what's always been yours. When is the last time you truly honored your body, your sensuality, and your divine feminine essence? If you're feeling disconnected, burnt out, or stuck in the hustle, I want to invite you to something extraordinary that I'm hosting called Awaken to Your Sacred Pleasure. This workshop is more than just an event. This is going to be a movement. It's a space where women come together to explore their inner power, to awaken their sensuality, and to reconnect with the sacred joy that has been waiting for them all along. Imagine a day filled with ceremonies and powerful practices and tools that help you shift from just getting by to really embracing your radiance. Let's explore rituals, archetypes, and movement, sacred tools together that are designed to really release blocks and to ignite your sacred pleasure. This isn't about doing more. This is about being more. So let's be present, more alive, and really more in love with yourself. So if you're ready to step into your full feminine power and awaken the pleasure that is your birthright, this is your sign. I'm hosting this masterclass on Thursday, November 28th at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern, and I would love for you to join me. You can find all of the details on my website at www.hq.elliemcmillan.com/awaken. I can't wait to see you there. Welcome back to the Attune to Your Alchemy podcast. I am coming to you today on another topic of sexuality and sensuality. And I think this is going to end up being a two-parter, but follow along with me. Today, I really want to talk about why is it we have been shamed, just some light topics, shamed away from our sensuality, and how our sexuality only falls into two categories of the Madonna and the whore. And how when we have both of these things together, both embodied sensuality and embodied sexuality, we really become incredibly magnetic. So let's dive in. Some definitions here when we talk about sensuality and sexuality, because a lot of times people lump these things together. And I was speaking to a girlfriend today just about how the lumping of these two things together has really created a division or a divide between women being able to love other women without it being weird or it being sexual or it being anything like that. And then there's also a divide between you and your partner, no matter what gender your partner is, in terms of sensuality, because sensuality ends up leading to sexuality. and how the sensual part of things are really just so incredibly nourishing, and they open us up for more of what's to come. So, sensuality is the enlivening of our senses, our touch, taste, smell, hearing, any of the things that really turn us on, if you will, that really allow for the senses to light up, where sexuality is often the act of penetration or any act that has to do with genitals in the same room, if you will. And so when we pair these two things together, what happens is that we have an experience of being really lit up or turned on through our senses. This idea of being turned on is just this heightened awareness. And whenever we get into the act of either penetration or orgasm, or just where we are engaging with our partner or lover in a sexual manner, that we have these already heightened senses kind of propelling us forward. And if you have any questions about these things, I highly encourage you to read a book by Emily Nagoski that I read a couple of years ago on the encouragement of a partner of mine, called Come As You Are. And it just completely changed my life with how I saw turn on with my partners. And like, call me nerdy, call me a little bit nerdy, but it's really important to me to understand what it is that turns my partner on and how they get lit up. And I think through experiences with some of my past partners, we get into our ego sense of things. And the ego tells us that we need to go in a self-reflective or self-centered manner of like, this turns me on, and therefore this is going to turn you on. And I think the mark of a really good lover is just the ability to witness the sensuality and the intimacy, the responses from their partner, and then determine from there what it is that their partner really needs or wants. So we've already taken a left turn. This is going to be a two-parter because I have a lot to say on these topics. So sensuality and sexuality, this is our source of power, especially through women. When these two aspects come together, we become magnetic. So on its own, sensuality connects us to our bodies, it connects us to the world, it, connects us to the environment, our families, our kin, our community, and sexuality connects us to our creative or life force giving and being. And so together, they really create a powerful combination for women to feel embodied, for them to be magnetic. And as women, we have been told since we were little girls that both of these things are off limits with each other, first of all. Second, that they're off limits unless we're behind a closed door. And so we have experiences in our life that maybe you can relate to, where it wasn't until for the longest time, this was me. It wasn't until the doors of the bedroom closed that I came alive with my partner. And as soon as those doors opened again, that got shut off. And I started to realize that the more I was embodied in my sensuality, the more I was alive with my senses. Last episode, we talked about, our clothing, anointing, jewelry, makeup, how we do our hair, how it is that what shoes we wear is so important with how we express our sensuality, because we're tantalizing the senses. And I really closed myself off from that. And as women in general, we close ourselves off because that is frowned upon. And honestly, whether or not we realize this is what I was speaking to a friend about today. If we realize that what's standing in the way from us having like completely hot, passionate, like wild, primal sex is actually the beliefs that we hold. Oof. Think about that for a minute. What is standing in the way is not necessarily a perfect partner or a partner that it desires us in a different way than maybe the partner that we have. It is the beliefs that both of us have. And we have been labeling sensuality and sexuality for millennia as shameful, as dangerous. There's nothing more dangerous than a woman who is embodied. And the patriarchy continues to perpetuate these beliefs. And this is why this is my work, is because I believe wholeheartedly that we can actually make such a change and such a difference in the world by reclaiming and remembering how our sensuality and sexuality actually brings us more abundance, more wealth for that matter. And not just because the sex industry is a huge industry. That's not even what we're talking about here. Just in your life, in every aspect, more love. We become healthier because we are in tune with our bodies. As a former yoga teacher, it was painful to watch my students come into class and be injured, always come in with an injury or working on something and thinking to myself, like, the embodiment practice of yoga is missing from your life. We are going through the motions. And the more we can tap into our senses, the more that we can really understand what pleases us, the more we can live with joy and connection. And it's just, wow, it's just so incredible. So, this leads us to the conversation around good versus bad women. Maybe you already know this, but I have been on the bad woman list for some time. So, this brings us to the discussion around good versus bad women. And let's first unpack this concept of the good girl. This is something that I'm highly conscious of. I have a dog. I have several pups that you sometimes hear in my podcasts, but I have one female dog. And I think about every time I say good girl to her. Now, I know the dog is different and under a different standard than women, but how many times do we perpetuate this concept of being good? And how, especially as women, have we been told to be good in our lives? And where has that gotten you? And I'm not out here saying, like, okay, ladies, let's get in formation. Bad girls unite. But I am saying, how are we striving for goodness? And what is that doing to us? And I will tell you from seeing my private clients, it is ruining us. The good girl is ruining us. And that is why I talk about the work that I do in sacred pleasure and sensuality as the crossroads between the fully embodied in her senses, sensual and sexual woman, and the sacred or holy woman, the one who knows beyond the patriarchy, that knows beyond societal conditioning, that you can't make me good, only I can. So the good versus bad, the Madonna versus the whore. We are perpetuatedly told that we need to be more or less, for that matter, less prude, more open, more extravagant, more wild, more crazy whenever the bedroom doors close. And for some of us, that's the only safe space for us to express that. And there's no denying that. The issue is when we cannot express that in our everyday lives out of fear of being seen as anything other than a good girl. So the temptress, we could even go back to, I'm only going to lightly touch on this, but I feel like we need a whole many episode discussion on Eve being tempted and eating the apple. Because, of course, she couldn't control her desire. She was not a good girl. And then we have sitting, properly. We have wearing dresses. We have flowers and playing with dolls and not getting our hands dirty. All of these good girl ideals as we are raised that we subconsciously carry into our adulthood that reminds us every day about who we should be. So the dichotomy of being this very prim and proper girl, out in the world versus this ravenous, this primal, this wild woman behind the bedroom doors is a hard thing to reconcile. We must dress modestly for the work that we want to do, and yet be voracious in our appetite in the evenings, if you will. So the division that has kept us contained over millennia of being good, of really desiring to be good, has been what has kept us from really enjoying ourselves and being fully embodied in our body, for that matter, and in our pleasure. And this leads us to using shame as a weapon. The amount of women that I have spoke to about the shame that they carry because of an incident, like put a finger up if, because of an incident when they were just coming into their maidenhood, just in their teenage years, their early 20s, maybe even a little bit younger, where they started to wake up to the eros, to the eroticism of life, into their senses, and innocently expressed themselves or embodied that. And that was uninvitedly, let's say, taken up by somebody often of the opposite sex that told us or expressed something to us that shut it down. Close your legs. Oof. Don't sit like that. What about ways that we've been told about how much cleavage to show or not show, depending on the environment that we were in, professional versus personal? I have this memory of me being probably 17 or 18 and going out with a woman that I babysat for. We went out together one night to the bars, if you will. Remember those days if you're of the mintage of I am. And I had a breast reduction when I was 18 years old. And the thing that struck me in getting a breast reduction was that for the very first time in my life, since hitting puberty, people, but in particular men, met my gaze. Prior to that, they never looked me in the eye. They were distracted by whatever it was that I was wearing. And no matter what I wore, it was a lot of cleavage. And so this one night, I went out with my friend, and when we got to the bar, there was a bouncer, as there is lots of times, checking ID. And she unbuttoned another button on my shirt and told me that it wouldn't matter that I didn't have ID. They wouldn't pay attention anyway. And I was both shamed and delighted, like relieved actually, that I had gotten into the bar unscathed because of my cleavage. Wow. So shame is really a very powerful tool for suppression. And by separating our sexuality, this is what's happened, is that we've separated the sexuality and the sensuality. We could really stigmatize both of those things. I just did this incredible in-person temple ceremony for a community of women, and we spent the whole time pleasing each other through our senses. This may be for the very first time in some of these women's lives that they have ever touched another adult woman in a non-sexual way. One of the women confessed that she hoped, even though she was coming to a sacred pleasure ceremony, that we would not be touching each other, but especially no one would touch her. And I thought to myself, what is it about touch that becomes so intimate? And what this is that we can have a direct response. And so as women used flowers, roses, chocolate, dates, essential oils, feathers, as they used these tools to touch each other's skin, to, maybe rub the rose along the jawline, the feather along someone's lips, to anoint somebody's third eye and hands and feet, and to really be with them in devotion to adoration. Just strictly sensual touch with no sexuality. I saw women heal years of shame, years of conditioning that sensual touch leads to sexual acts. And they were able to remember and to reclaim this act for themselves that they never, ever had experienced before. And the shame and the judgment, this question, even if, am I doing this right? We get to relieve ourselves from the expectation of something right or something wrong happening, because we are able to fully be present with someone when we are in our senses and engaging them through theirs. So we got to retract, we got to eliminate, really, for a moment in time, but also recreate. When we go into temple, when we go into ceremony, we go above the personality and we start to make quantum leaps. And that's why healing happened the way that it did during that ceremony. So we also addressed this sisterhood wound that really fosters competition and that shame of doing it right or doing it more or doing it longer or being more experienced. Any of these things starts to melt away when we are really able to see who is in front of us through ceremony for who they really are. So, sensuality, one of the things that we talked about is this separation of sensuality and sexuality, and how really we need to pair them back together. They belong together. But that doesn't mean that we need to have sexuality with everyone that we express our sensuality with, which I think is probably the most healing part of the whole ceremony, of the whole goddess of love, is that she teaches us that I can love you unconditionally and not have to love you unconditionally. So, this disempowerment that we felt through our senses, through our sexuality, this has kept us in the cycle of shame. This has kept us being good. This has kept us being small. And it has really kept us from being magnetic, our true magnetic selves. The female, cut that. Feminine energy by nature is magnetic. It's alluring. It draws people in. And in olden times, cut that part. And our ancestors used their sensuality and sexuality to actually create ceremony. They would procreate on the lands in the spring to bless them. They would use the fluids from their sexual acts as offerings to the earth by way of showing Mother Earth just how thankful they were for her bounty. Does that mean that we need to go to the forest a few more times? Maybe on the beach? Soccer pitch? Who knows? I won't judge you. You go. So we have so many things so far between sexuality and sensuality. Let's dive into one more. This erosion of connection, the sensuality and sexuality. When we separate those two things, we start to erode the connection that we have, both with the person in front of us and the connection of those two things. And so, what I've seen in my work is that we have people who have an expectation. I've mentioned this book at the beginning of the episode, the Come As You Are, this expectation of I'm going to flash you my genitals, and by nature, you should be turned on because I'm turned on just thinking about things. And we have a gas pedal and we have a brake. And for some people, that is a big brake. I mean, for me, depends on who you are, but it's a big brake. And then we have these gas pedals that it could be in the way that somebody enjoys their food, in the way that they enjoy their beverages. One of my former partners, whenever she took a sip of a beverage, she would always say, ah, afterwards. And it was so natural. It was not contrived. It was when she was satiated with her beverage and taking a sip. So in the morning, drinking her coffee, she would, and it was so delightful to me to witness her in her sensuality of enjoying her coffee in the morning. It was so lovely. And I don't know about you, but the connection that I want with my partner, I want them to drink me up, if you will. I want them to be like the adoration that I want to feel from my partner when we engage together is it is high. I want to feel desired like most women do. And when we disconnect the sexuality and sensuality proponents, but also what happens is that we disconnect ourselves from them, we start to realize that we don't know what turns us on. And we have an expectation that our partners will know what turns us on and will know how to turn us on, what to do exactly, how to do it, and that it'll be right every time. And that is not the case. And often that disconnection, and often that, and often that disconnection creates jealousy because we've unplugged from our partner. We've unplugged from their senses. And so if we've unplugged, they must have plugged in naturally to somebody else or to something else. We also see a lot of mistrust here. And this happens this happens both between our partner and us, but also between women. How many times, come with me on this journey for a moment, without judgment, how many times have you had a moment of mistrust for another woman who was embodied in their sensuality and sexuality? How many times have you said something along the lines of, well, that must be nice, or I wonder how she got there? This dynamic of perpetuating the sisterhood wound, it is so fast. Our internal dialogue around this is so quick to judge that sometimes we don't even know, we can't even hear our internal dialogue. We just have a sensation or a feeling. And I know from my perspective, this has kept me separate. This has kept me distanced from people in my life that I have actually learned a lot from. And I'll speak directly to one of the so is that distrust perpetuating the belief that you have around another woman and her sensuality and sexuality and embodiment of that? Or is this a reflection of how disconnected you are from yours? Mm. And then finally, I want to speak about separating love and desire. And this separation of sensuality and sexuality is exactly the separation of desire and love. Like we have sensuality, which is part of our desire. It's part of our wanting, our being turned on. And then love as the sexuality, which is, the procreation. It's this is just, how people get together. This is how the world continues. And so we're stripping ourselves, we're stripping our relationships of this wholeness because we've portioned off the belief that we shouldn't desire things, that we should be our partners. Oh, I hear this one so much. My partner should just know. What should your partner know? You are your authority. You are the authority. You are the one that is in charge of your turn-ons and your desires and your expression, no matter if you're using words or not. And this creates a divide because one partner is always falling short. And it's often women. We are falling short because we are not satisfied and we are not expressing what satisfies us. So the division really reinforces the patriarchal narratives that separate this love from the erotic energy, and that makes it harder to build deeply connected and loving partnerships. Wow. Okay, beloveds. We have really hit on a lot of points here with sexuality and sensuality. Let's save the next portion of this for part 2 tomorrow. Thank you so much for being with me. I will see you in the next episode.